Thank you so much. I'm really excited about this opportunity. And for me, it's a fun topic, and I hope you all enjoy as well. So, just briefly, we're going to go through what the Church History Library is. I'll introduce you to the Church History Library catalog, Church History Biographical Database. We'll look at different types of collections like unit histories, journals, photographs, registers, indexes. And then I will show you how you can get further help if I'm not able to answer your question today. But to start, I just want you to be aware of this is probably the easiest place to go. You can just do a Google search. Sometimes remembering URLs can be difficult, but if you just Google "discover ancestors in church history," this is the top result. If for some reason it doesn't get the top result, you can put in Latter-day Saint as well, and that will probably also bring it up to the top if it's not, although, well, it looks like that didn't for me, but maybe church history and then include library in that search. But this is the link, and I'm going to go ahead and put it in the chat so that you can access it there as well. But the nice thing about this website is that it has everything that I'm going to talk about today. So you can just go to it and you can find out all of this stuff. Find all, he said something about this. I don't remember what it was, but you can go here and probably try to find it. So the Church History Library is the official archive for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And that includes baptism records, temple records, ward records, and stake records, and branch records, and mission records, and all of those things. We also have the papers of most every general authority in the church. And we have journals of missionaries. We have journals of pioneers. We've got other pioneer records, things like that. It's a pretty large collection, and there's a lot of things that are available online. Well, I'll show you some of those, but some things are only available in the building, so you've got to go to Salt Lake to see those or request that they be digitized. And with enough requests, that will happen, and then you can just go online and look at the things that you wanted to as well. So let's start with the catalog. Just like any other library, the Church History Library has a catalog. And one thing that's important to remember with searching this catalog is if you search for an ancestor, you may not find anything with this search, because this is really searching the books and the records that are in there, but not necessarily the names of the people that are in those records. And even if that record is digital, you might not find what you're looking for right off the bat. So for example, one of my ancestors is Dudley Levitt, and it's been a while since I've done this. There are a handful of things that talk about him, but we're looking at about 17 things. 3 of them are digital. You can see that over there. But he's in the collection quite a bit more. And so if instead of searching for Dudley Levitt, we searched for like the Gunlock Ward, where I know he was a member, he's going to be listed in a lot of these things if they correspond to the time period. So this manuscript history, 1877, he's probably mentioned in there. Now, this is one of the items that's not digital. And so if you really did want to see this, you'd need to go down and look at it or request that it be digitized. And they like to digitize as much as they can. They're constantly digitizing things. And so the more people that request something, the more likely it is to be digitized. And we can actually filter here for Gunlock and look at digital and then apply that filter, and we'll see what in the collection is digital. So you can see there's a photograph of the stake center. There's some interviews. There's the record of members collection. That's going to have the baptisms, the confirmations, the priesthood ordinations, marriages, and all of that stuff in there. And that is behind a sign-in wall, right? So it is digital, but you have to sign in to look at it. But the other thing you can do is you say that it's digital, you can just request access to it, and they'll give you a temporary access to any one of those. You just explain what you're looking for, and then they will usually always grant those. So, and then I don't know why Guatemala is coming up in here. It must be some Gunlock Guatemala kind of thing. But yeah, that's the basic thing for this. Just like I say, you want to make sure that you're searching by more general terms rather than the last name or the first name of the person. And like I said, you can find things by name, but a lot of times there's a way more in the collection that it's just not going to be searchable by name yet. eventually it will be. So a lot of these things, like I said, even though they're digital, they're not indexed, and so they're not searchable digital. So yeah, Robert had a great question. That is my next topic. How do you find out what ward an ancestor was part of? And this can be tough, but Family Search is a good resource for that, because from Family Search you can usually find access to censuses, and from the census you could hopefully tell what ward they would have been a part of, especially when you're dealing with the really old records, a lot like more than 100 years or so ago. The only place really that had more than one ward 100 years ago would have been like Salt Lake City, Provo, like some of that Intermountain West areas, right? And so if you can just find out where they were living, chances are if they're living in Nephi, Utah, they're going to be in the Nephi First Ward records. And if there's more than one or two wards, then you might need to check one or two at the, for that time period as well. So let's just do that for an example. So Nephi, and I'm gonna say ward records. Actually, I'll just say Nephi ward. And so there's the Nephi ward manuscript, and this one goes 1847 to 1900. And the second ward looks like it's a little bit later as well. But a really great place to help you, if you can find in the census where they're living, then do a Google search for Mormon places. And that's the homepage there. Mormon Places has a map, and you can go on this map. And if you know that your ancestors are from some small town in England, and you just need to know what options there are. So let's say that they're from this Westwood, Orton Westwood, then you could say, well, they might be going to this Harley branch. They might be going to the Barrow branch. Sometimes they show boundaries like Harley did for a second, or they might be going someplace else. So you can find those branches and then look in. And if you look at the detailed view for each of these, it will actually show you the collections that we have that talk about that have lists of members in those collections, right? So this one is LR530. That's a church history library call number. So if I copy that, LR530, go back to the catalog and put that into my search instead of the name, then we'll find that specific branch. So here's that branch historical record. It's digital. And so we can go in and look at this and see. So whenever you're dealing with ward and branch records, and this goes back to Robert's earlier question in the chat as well about early records, the records are only as good as the ward clerk that's assigned at the time. And sometimes they're fantastic. There's lots of good detail, lots of information, and other times they're just not. Sometimes even if the clerk was good, they had to travel across the plains, and sometimes these records were lost. And so it's a little frustrating, but you can just kind of look and see what you can find. And for example, for St. Louis, early records of the church, like before Utah records, what you want to do is you can try to look, and like we did in the catalog, we can just look for St. Louis. And we'll want to check 1830 maybe to like 1847. And you can get more specific as well, right? And say like, I know that he died in this year, so let's just do that. And it looks like we do have a St. Louis branch historical record, 1846 to 1847. And just because those are the official years, sometimes they actually go earlier. So you imagine that that somebody's called in 1846 to be the branch clerk, and one of the first things that branch clerk is probably going to do is go around and talk to the members and say, now, when did you get baptized? And then I'll write that down in here. So sometimes, even though it says that that's the start date, 1846, we might find that there are records in here that are older than that. So you just kind of have to look. This one looks like he's got Constitution of the Saints there. That's kind of fun. We just navigate ahead to about halfway through. They do scan every page, even if it's blank. So if you see a blank page, don't be alarmed. Let's see if we can find something else with some content on it. Here we go. So, and you got to brush up on your handwriting recognition skills and look through this. But so yeah, there's a fair chance. So here's Joseph Clements, maybe. Don't recognize his name. So there's stuff that you can find in here. And then again, so Mormon Places is a great one. Mormon Places covers 1830 to 1930. And so if you're looking for somebody after 1930, you might need to look in other locations to try to figure out where they would have been living. But this covers most every mysterious ancestor that would have had records in the church. Pretty much after 1930, the records are a lot better and it should be easier to find them. So that's the catalog. I wanted to talk about one resource that we have that kind of helps people through the catalog. And for that, I'm going to go back to the Find Your Family and Church History page. And that is this church history biographical database. As it says, more than 100,000 Latter-day Saints are listed in this. And it started out as the Pioneer database. You may have heard of that. And then that was started, 20, 30 years ago. And then more recently, about 5 years ago, they started a missionary database. And then recently they combined them and then added the Mormon Battalion. And then we will be adding more saint records to this right now. So if we want to go back and do a search for Dudley Levitt, just because this is my deal, I can search for whoever I want. And there he is right there. Now, I know that he served a mission and it hasn't been added yet, because I haven't gotten around to telling them to add his mission. He served a couple of different missions down to some of the Native Americans in southern Utah. And so this is not like 100% like church records. Everything that's in church records should be in here, but it can be a great starting point. So from here, from his page, I can see information about when he was born. I can see information about how he traveled. If he served a mission, I would see that. There's a link to Family Search, and then down at the bottom under sources, you'll find records that verify. So one of the things they did to figure out for sure who was a pioneer is if they're in Utah before the railroad, then they had to have crossed the plains. And so if we don't exactly know what company they belonged in, but they're in Utah before 1897, I can't remember when the train came, but we know they had to have crossed, right? So they'll get added that way. A fun feature that they've added on here is Show My Ancestors. If we click that, activate Ancestry View, it's going to have me sign in with Family Search. And then it will show me who in the database I'm related to. And so if you want to do some research and you're not sure if you've got pioneer ancestors and things, so there's Dudley, there's some other people that I'm related to. A lot of these are actual ancestors. And then, oh, yeah, it looks like this is only direct ancestors. I think there might be a way to show like who you're related to and not necessarily direct ancestors. Yeah, let me show you somebody with a mission. Let's go to, well, Zara Pulsifer served lots of missions, but let's go to somebody that served in a more formal mission. Early in the church, missions were kind of, people were sent on missions. They didn't really have organizations like they do now. And so sometimes those missions are a little bit harder to track down, because without an official mission president and mission secretary and things like that, sometimes we know about the mission, but we don't really know that much about it. But by 1860, the British mission had been established and some more formal missions followed shortly after. So here he's service in the British mission. We know who he was set apart by. A lot of these missions come from the missionary registry, which was kept in Salt Lake City, and it listed everybody that went on missions, who set them apart, what mission they were sent to, that kind of thing. So we'll know who set them apart, and that can be kind of fun to look at. If you go to a mission like the British mission, there's a full page devoted to it. It'll have a timeline, which includes different things like when the mission was founded and who the mission presidents were that served. British mission was, as the oldest continuously operated mission, it has a lot of presidents. So here we have organization where the European mission president and the British mission had some things. We have the mission headquarters was moved, and whenever we know the address of where the headquarters was, we'll put that in there. Sometimes those buildings still exist, and that's kind of fun. If you ever go to England and you have an ancestor that served, you could potentially sometimes visit some places where they at least went to and maybe sometimes lived in. So that's all here, but what I wanted to show is down at the bottom again, just like people, there's sources. And the manuscript histories should always be one of the earliest source, one of the first sources on here on for each mission. The British mission is unique because it has an index that's separate from the manuscript history. Sometimes the index is part of the manuscript history, and I can show you one of those. But let's look at the index to the British mission history. And this is going to take us back into the catalog and take us to the manuscript history for the British mission index. And it's a bunch of index cards. And if we went to just one of these at random here, you can see that this is Joseph S. Ball, and he's mentioned in the British mission manuscript history in 1899 and in 1900 on these dates. So knowing those dates, we could go back to this, open up the manuscript history, and if it was Joseph Ball that we were interested in looking at, we can look first at December 2nd, 1899 in the history, which is organized chronologically. So we would just scroll down to 1899, and it's in here. And was it December 2nd? I don't know if we'll take the time to actually go there. So here's January 22nd, 1899. And when they indexed it, they would underline the names of the people as they were indexing them. So a lot of times you can find them pretty quickly if you just look for the underlined ones. But so here's a lot of people mentioned in some of these different branches. All of the manuscript histories for missions are pretty good resources for missionaries. You often are not able to find members of those missions. So, you know, who the missionaries were teaching and baptizing and living. So we've got the Cardiff branch, right? James Watts is the president of the Cardiff branch in Wales, but he was a missionary, and that's why he's mentioned in here. So they don't often mention members of the Cardiff branch. So to that, you'd want to go to the ward and branch records for Cardiff and see if you can find them mentioned in there. So hopefully that's clear. Now, they do sometimes mention members in some of these, especially if the members were involved in the missionary meetings. So they will often have a lot of meetings outlined, and they'll say who is at each meeting and that kind of thing. So one thing that can be fun for this kind of research as well is, let's say that I have my ancestor here who served in the mission, in the British mission, but I don't know who he served with, and it would be neat to know who his companions were. So I could look him up in the index, find out when he's mentioned, then go to the pages where he's mentioned, and then see if it says, you know, so here's the appointments. Jason W. Green and David Butler have been appointed to labor as traveling elders in the Norwich Conference. And so if David Butler was my ancestor, I would know that his companion, is it JAS? Is that Jason? I know it's an abbreviation anyway. So it would be a hint for him. What is it again?
JAS is for James.
That's right, because Jason is not really a common name in the 1800s. Thank you. Yeah. So JAS is James. JHN is John. So great. Yeah. And then once you found who your ancestor was companions with, you can come back to this database, and then we can search for James Green. And then we, find him. It's not going to be that one. That's not that one. We can filter by mission. So let's say we want British mission. And that looks like that's him. 1899 is what is the entry. So here's James W. Green serving the British mission. And if I wanted to, I could click on view and family search and go to his family search page. And because I've got a photo of him and my ancestor together, and then I could post that on family search to show his descendants a mission picture that maybe they've never seen before. So those are some fun things that you can do with this kind of search. Okay, let's talk a little bit. We kind of briefly went over, actually, before I do that, I want to go back to Find Your Family. and I want to go through these research guides. We've created a bunch of different research guides. And so like this one on missions and missionaries goes over a lot of the stuff that I've talked about just now about how to search for missionaries and how to find them in the missionary database and how to find them on the mission manuscript histories. And then we've got other topics here too on family history, general authorities, the journal history of the church, perpetual immigrant, like a lot of different topics. And so these are a fantastic way to kind of get into and find things. The journal history is worth a mention. So the manuscript history, as you can see, is just they didn't create that at the time. They created it later on based on the sources that they'd been able to gather about the British mission or whichever unit they were doing. They would do manuscript histories for branches and stakes and missions. And then whenever they'd see something mentioned in a newspaper or a church periodical, they would throw that in to that specific unit, whether it's a mission or a branch or a ward. And then they would talk about that. So the journal history is similar, but it's the entire church. So it's a pretty big collection. If you go to it, I would suggest, well, you can go to a date, like if there's a specific date that you want to look into. But most of the time, you're going to want to go to the index first. And it's similar to the British Mission Index, where it's got these little cards. And then you can look up the person that you're looking for and see if they're mentioned in this thing. So some of the things that are mentioned in here, sometimes they mention missionaries, but not as consistently as the mission registry. Other things that would be in here is if Brigham Young sent somebody to a location, then a lot of times it'll be in here. They do mention missionaries if they're called from the pulpit. And so if you have something like that happen, then it's going to be in there. And then a lot of times it's just kind of general news related to something that would be newsworthy at the time would be reported in here. So this is the Ben Lomond South Stake has an entry. And so every time that stake is mentioned in the annual history, it's in here. And the annual history, they only stopped doing this a handful of years ago. And I think that's mostly related to the idea that computers had kind of taken over some of this. But this is pre-computer technology here to find out things about these wards. And so they go up pretty recent. There is a block as well, because sometimes the journal history is going to have sensitive information. So the digital images go to 1923 right now. But if you're interested in finding out something from the 1960s, you can either see, like we did for Ben Lomond stake, there was some entries from the 60s, and it kind of said what it was mentioned for. And so that might be enough that you can say, okay, now I know what it's mentioned for. I can go and look it up in the church news or in whatever the Ogden newspaper is called. I'm blanking on the name. Anyway, and so that might be enough for what you need. And if you need more, then you can go to the church history library, or you can request access to the later images for the journal history of the church. One of the questions is journals. And yes, so the collection policy for journals, and I think there's a research guide on journals, but the collection policy for the church history library on journals is they want a journal if it has significant participation with the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And so obviously missionaries, pioneers, those are for sure given. But even if somebody had served as a Relief Society president for like a decade or so, and she wrote about that in her journal, then they would take that. So journals of people serving during the war are often ones that we do want to collect. And so we do have some journals from World War I, World War II, and other conflicts as well. The one issue, though, is that World War I would be mostly open, but World War II might be too close to the present that they wouldn't want to break confidentiality with things for people that are still living, right? So we might have the journal and you might eventually be able to see it, but it might take a while. Anything that's in the catalog in the library that is marked as restricted, let's just go to the catalog really quick and search for, let's do something more recent like Korean War, and we'll just do journal as the search. And so we've got this person, and then this is not a journal, but this is an AV recording. This is zoom in a little bit, makes it easier for you guys to see. So AV is audio visual, PH is photograph. If it looks like this, then it's a published item. And so, and then MS is a manuscript. So here's my experiences. And you can see this goes all the way up to 2002. And if we look at that, it does say open to research. Oh, that's cool. Okay. I would have expected something that goes that recent might be closed. So if it does say closed to research, sometimes it's still possible to look at it, especially if you give them your reasoning and you say, like, this is my uncle, I'd really like to read his stuff. Or I think my father might be mentioned by this person because they were friends, or they worked at the same time, then you might still be able to look at it too. When it's close to research, what they will do is look at it and say, so here's a missionary journal from a more recent time period. It says sign in to determine access. So why don't we go ahead and sign in? You sign in with a church account. And if you do not have a church account, then you can just get like a guest account. Oh, I have to enter in my code or. Okay. So it's not necessarily open to me, which is what I assumed. Most default things are you'd have to click this button to request digital access, and that sends you to a form that you fill out where you say they auto enter in these are the things that you want to look at, and then you just give them the reason why. So you would just say family history, and you'd say he knew my father, something like that, right? And then you can put in the other information as well to kind of get that, and then click submit. And then they'll look at your request and they'll either grant or deny it depending on what's contained in here. And it just depends on this person's journal, like how detailed he was. Did he talk about things that would be a breach of confidentiality if they were put out in the public, that kind of thing. So that's something to be aware of.
Ryan, there is a question in the chat. So can you look up journals of men that lived during World War I or World War II?
Yeah, that's kind of what I was answering with those comments just now, where it depends on the journal and lots of other factors, right? They evaluate everything before they put it online. They're not just going to put something online, and they even evaluate things before they let you see it in person. So it would just depend on a lot of that. I was going to show you really quick before I forgot. Let's just see all missions. This is kind of a fun way to look at things too. So you can look by mission. We already saw the British mission homepage, but we can just go to any other mission in the church and have some more information about it. And I'm just going to go to this mission president's page because I wanted to show you the mission registry. So here are his entries in the mission registry. And if we click on one, we can see what it looks like. So here's the names of the missionaries, list their fathers and mothers' names, when they were born, where they were born. So it's a lot of good stuff, especially if you don't have this. Who baptized them, which is really cool to see who baptized them. Sometimes they don't remember. So, but sometimes like this one's left it blank. And then if they're in an elders quorum, then it'll list the elders quorum that they're in, where they were living at the time of the mission call, where they were going on their mission, which sometimes is the mission name, and sometimes it's more specific. Like this one's going to the California mission, it looks like, but specifically Palo Alto. So sometimes that's some good information to have as well. When they were set apart and by whom, I told you that we had that. Most of the time they're set apart by apostles, and then when they returned, which is sometimes blank if they but the way they gathered this often was from the mission periodicals. Anyway, yeah, so this is a really cool record that you can look at. Another interesting one that's in here too often is the First Presidency missionary calls and recommendations. So mission calls were usually sent out via letter. The bishop would recommend somebody for a mission, and then they would write them a letter, and then we don't usually have a lot of those letters because they didn't keep copies. But when they wrote us back, we would keep the copy. And so we've got some of these. So this is Henry S. Tanner's response that he's willing to serve a mission. Sometimes they say they can't, or they can't yet, or let me get my crops in this year and then I'll go, something like that. So sometimes it's nice. And then in this case, in a lot of cases, they have the bishop of what ward he was in at the time, who's also, he's saying I very cheerfully endorse the above and recommend Elder Tanner for the labor of both for faithfulness and ability. So that's really nice little note there. And so these are cool because they're usually written in the handwriting of the missionary. And so if you have a missionary ancestor, you can see a letter that has been in our archives for sometimes more than 100 years, and then you can see it. So that's a really cool thing that you might want to look at. Another fun one that I wanted to show, and let's just go back to the catalog here. We saw one earlier, but that is the collection PH 211. This is a photograph collection, and it's from the physical facilities department for the church. While that's loading, I can answer this question, or death eulogies. It depends. We've got a lot of stuff in the church history library, but the only time we'd have a eulogy is if it was part of some other collection that was donated. So I wouldn't guarantee that you'd be able to search and find something on there. Most of the time we just don't. But like I said, if it was part of somebody's like overall collection that we accepted the entire collection, then it might be in there. But usually the only time we do that is if it's like a mission president or a general authority, or like a stake president who was a long time stake president, something like that, right? So that's not always a guarantee. You're better off looking for death eulogies as part of obituaries or in other places like that. Okay, so Physical Facilities Department photograph collection. It covers 1890 to 1988. It's an enormous collection, and usually searching for it this way is not what you want to do. What you want to do is find the name of the branch that you're looking for, that you know was in operation from about 1890 to 1988, and search for it that way. But they've got photographs of most of the branches in the church. I mean, most of the chapels and things like that in the church. And so this looks like it was a home that was converted into a chapel in Japan. Sometimes these photographs are while it's under construction, because they were kind of documenting like this is how the chapel is proceeding. And so sometimes they look pretty bare. I don't know if that one's under construction or not, but that's North Dakota. That's what North Dakota always looks like, right? Just, even in July, there's still snow on the ground. I'm teasing, of course. So this is really fun because especially if you maybe attended a ward like this a few years back, and you can find the ward building that you attended with a photograph, maybe from around the time that you attended, maybe from around the time you got baptized, something like that would be a fun addition to your personal history. And on maybe your father, grandfather, grandparents, grandmother, their history as well. So this is a really great collection. Like I said, navigating it this way is not really that good. What you probably want to do is go and do a search for the location that you're looking for. Let's say Las Vegas, and then I'll just include PH 211 in that search because it'll kind of focus it on that collection. So my grandfather was baptized in the Las Vegas First Ward, but it wasn't this building. But still, you can find stuff that way. So that's a really fun collection. Oh, and I probably should have done this when we were talking about Korea. Let's do a World War I journal. So what I'm going to actually do is search for France. And then I'm going to narrow it down to, under genre, I'm going to narrow it down to journals. And then I'm going to do the date and go from 1914 to 1919, something like that. I'm just curious. It does mention World War One. You could also search for World War One or World War Two, but a lot of times it's going to be. So this one is an account of Crow's experiences in World War One, departing in Quantico until his death in France. So let's do the same search, but we'll search for World War One. But what I was saying is, if you search for World War One, you might get lots of other things that happened during World War One, but are not necessarily World War One journals, right? So again, I narrowed it down to journals. I'm searching for World War One. I don't need to put in dates because if it's during World War One, then it's going to be in there. And then just out of curiosity, I'm going to switch to digital so we can see the ones that we can actually look at. And you can do this with missions, although it's probably better to go here first and see if a missionary journal is one of the sources. Because if we know about the missionary journal, we'll often put it down here in a source. But for this missionary, we don't have a journal. We do have a collection of his correspondence, but not a journal. So you could do this kind of search for missionary journals, pioneer journals, that kind of thing as well. Or just any kind of journal. Let's say you wanted to find a journal, and we can do France as well again. But you wanted to find a journal that was from France that covers the time when your ancestor was, either joined the church or served a mission, something like that, just to see if they mention your ancestor in that journal. So those are some of the things that you can do. Okay, I talked about the missionary register and I talked about the journal history index. And I'm just looking at my list of what I wanted to make sure I covered. There's actually quite a bit to talk about. Why don't, while I'm thinking about that still, I will show you how you can get help if you have other questions. Oh yeah, acronyms. Somebody asked a question about acronyms. I think there is. Let me go back to the Find Your Family in Church History and two of the research guides. And I believe there is a research guide about the catalog. Maybe not. The acronyms, there's not that many. So like I said, AV is audiovisual, PH is photograph, MS is manuscript, and then the other one is it's a modified Dewey Decimal System. And you'll know those because they'll say it'll say M for Mormon, which we don't use anymore. Oh yeah, CR is a good one. CR is church records or corporate records. It's kind of a combination of the two. They're kind of the same thing. And then there's occasionally some other ones like NZ is New Zealand. So I guess I should probably say NZ. And that's just to kind of let you know that it's a little frustrating actually, because it could be a journal, and journals are usually MS for manuscript, but it'll say NZ for New Zealand just to let you know that it's actually in New Zealand. And so, if you're hoping to look at it in person, you'd have to go down there. Okay, so to get help, let's look at CR 1234. That's an easy one to remember. This is Brigham Young's collection, and it's huge. And so you actually don't get like a main thing for CR 1234 because there's subsections of it. So anything CR 1234 is a Brigham Young, and then this series 5 is specifically immigrating companies reports. The first series are the office files. There's letters, there's journals, there's all kinds of stuff in here. And so when we say is CR 1234 is a collection, and then inside that collection are sub collections or series, and inside those series there's going to be multiple documents, right? So in this series we have Captain David Lewis's company's report, just as far as like how it's organized, to kind of give you an idea there. And most of the time it doesn't matter as long as you can find it, right? So if you were looking for David Lewis and you did a search for him, this would come up. If you did a search for J.M. Stewart, that would come up. But I don't know what the J stands for, if it's John or James or Joseph or whatever. But if you search for Joseph Stewart, this might not come up. That's what I was kind of going back to earlier, what I said earlier about searching for a name. Sometimes it's useful and sometimes it's not. So if you don't find anything with a name, don't give up. And unfortunately, if you just search for Stewart, there may be way too many things to go through to find this. But anyway, we're working on making this better. Okay, so to get help on any page in the church history section, so the research guide, I think on the individual research guide you can, but in the catalog, definitely for sure, up in the top right corner is an Ask Us button. And if you click on that, it will open up this form that you can fill out where you can ask your question, put in your information. Church account username is not required, but it's useful for them to know that you can, if they need to give you access to something, that's how they would use that. But if you want to leave it blank, that's fine too. If they need to give you access to something, they can just ask you. And then you ask your question and you can give some more detail. Library call number is useful rather than just saying, why is his name spelled wrong on this record? It might be useful for them to know what record you're talking about. So you can include the call number in your question. How would you describe your role is an optional one, but you can say that you're generally interested in church history. You don't want to pick that one. It'll just slow you down. They won't answer your question faster. It'll actually get routed to some specific team that handles general authorities, and they'll look at your name and say, you're not a general authority. So we'll have to bounce this around to find the right person for it. That's the only one that actually does anything actually different. The other ones are just good for us to know what you're doing for, but I would also explain in detail what you're looking for. And we don't need a whole novel about your connection to this person. You can just say that, I'm connected to this person, and so I'd like more information about this book or this journal or whatever else you're looking for. And then you can attach a file if you want. Oh, CAPTCHA, huh? That's new. Anyway, so that's a great place to go. They do try to answer your question very quickly, and they're quite knowledgeable. There's a team that go through these, and they're all professionals, and they all have different expertise. And so if you're asking a question about a photograph, it'll probably go to one of them. If you're asking a question about a pioneer, it'll go to a different one, because they kind of focus and become experts on those different topics. Okay, that's everything that I wanted to cover. If anybody has any questions, you're welcome to ask them now if I haven't answered them before, or if there's something that came up.
I have a question.
Yeah.
So I'm trying to figure exactly where all I should look in the church history catalog. So there is two missionaries that were arrested in Shell Creek, Carter County, Tennessee in 1885. I just looked to see if I could find him by location, Shell Creek, Carter County, and I couldn't find it. And then C.F. Christensen, did it pull it up? No. Didn't pull it up by the name, but they went to trial. There's an article that I got back in Tennessee when I was back there, and I was just, where would I look online if I can't find it by the location?
Yeah. So you said it was C.F. Christensen?
C.F. Christensen, and it's S-E-N, C as in cat, F as in Frank, Christensen.
Yeah. So one thing is the initials are really frustrating because they don't help much when you're doing a search like this. And it seems like you'd want to put them in, but I would suggest not putting it in, and you're going to get lots of results. But you know that Tennessee was the mission, was the location. So you can select the Southern States Mission, and then that will narrow it down to Christensen's in the Southern States Mission. And then you could look for, it's probably this guy, maybe, right?
It's probably him.
And if it's not him, then we can keep looking and find somebody else.
Oh, okay.
But
the whole article just has him as initial C.
Yeah.
Franklin, is that what it said?
Yeah. The other thing you can do, actually, and I'll show you in here, at least you used to be able to do this. I think it's under mission. Died in the field. So we can select that, and then this will show us Christensen's in the Southern States Mission that died in the field, but there's none listed. So it's possible that the name is spelled incorrectly in the database, or it's possible that he's not registered, he's not listed as one of our ones that we had that died in the field.
Okay, well, he didn't die.
Oh, he didn't die. He was just attacked.
No, he was arrested.
Arrested, that's right.
But actually, my ancestor came out of the mountains and was a witness for him. So I just wanted to see if he had a journal or anything that maybe mentioned my family that weren't members of the church.
Yeah. So the other place that I would go is the Southern States Mission Manuscript History.
Okay.
Yeah, because a lot of times if there was any kind of situation like that, it would be mentioned in the manuscript history. So here's the Southern States Mission Manuscript History. Like I was saying before about the British mission, this one has the index within. So I would start with the index and then look up Christensen in the index, and then that would verify that it was him, because a lot of times these indexes will give a little snippet. Sometimes they'll give a little snippet about what they're in that entry for. Sometimes it's like, this is when they first arrived in the mission, and then this is when they departed. And then sometimes there'll be one in the middle, like they were at this meeting, and sometimes it'll say they were arrested by the police and kept in jail for some period of time. So this is taking a while to load, and I'm glad, because
that's okay. That's
an opportunity to tell you that sometimes this happens because it's a big file. This one is actually closed to research, probably because it mentions people being excommunicated or something in the index, because it'll say like so-and-so, and then it'll say excommunicated on this date as part of the note. So what they do in that situation, we can still see this because they've gone through and redacted. So once this loads, as you go down and look at it, you'll see little black bars blocking out certain things that happen. But
there is a question in the chat from Chris Baby.
The nice thing when it is like this, though, it takes a while to load, but that does mean that you can do text searching. Do Control F, it'll take us down to the Christensens, and then we can just scroll down, and there's the Christian path. Oh yeah, and I think
jail.
Yeah, it does say jail.
1885. That's him. Yeah. Great.
Probably May 13th is, well, actually maybe March 1st, because I think all of these are related to the jail. So it's probably March 1st, and then you can look at these other ones as well.
Okay, great.
Periodicals is a good question, and I'm glad that was asked, because that was something I meant to talk about, but it wasn't on my list. So if you go back to the Find Your Family, actually, maybe this would be better. I think there is a research guide. More often, I will just do a search for church periodicals, because I know there's a page, but it may not be a research guide. So let's just go to Google, and we're going to search for, and then it's just faster. I know I should spell out Latter-day Saints, but this should still work. And yeah, church periodicals from the history. Yeah, so this is a good one. No, there's another one though. Let's do the same search. And I'm going to include church history library. Oh, I know they've got one. So you can, I'm doing this because you can just go to the catalog and you can say, like, you can do a search for a periodical like Church News, right? The problem is that it's not very good at putting the primary thing up top, and it doesn't work to go digital as well, because it's just, they just don't do a good job with that. But I will say too, like Deseret News, you're actually better off going to Utah Digital Newspapers, because it has the most complete online Deseret News that you can get to without like going into an actual building, you know. So if you want to, you can just search the whole thing and it'll search all of Utah digital newspapers, which is kind of cool. But if you do want specifically Deseret News, then you can go to browse up in the top here, pick Salt Lake County, and then pick Deseret News. And then, yeah, we can just browse all issues of this newspaper and it'll just give us everything. We can narrow it to specific time periods or whatever. The nice thing about Utah digital newspapers is that from 1830, it goes up to 1977. And so from 1930 to 1977, the church news is included in Utah digital newspapers. So if we did a search for like Temple open house, we might get something from the Deseret News, but it might actually be something from the church news in that search. So it's useful to just search for, you know, and even people like, I know that my grandfather, Paul Combs, was, and I'll just put Long Beach in here too. He was in a Long Beach bishopric in the 60s. And I know his photograph is in the church news. And so depending on how good their, it was in the 60s, depending on how good their text recognition is and things like that, you might be able to find it that way. But I really want to find that page where we've got all of the periodicals linked. There it is. No, is that it? My page keeps shifting here. Magazines and newspapers. Yeah. So this is links to all of the, basically everything. So this is what you want to find. And I suppose if we would have been a little bit more precise when we search for church history, library, search for church news, search for improvement era, you know, then this probably would have come up. But yeah, so we can click on any one of these and it should take us into the catalog, into that actual item. And they're either going to be PDF like this, or they're going to be images. Let me see if I can find one that's images. Yeah, so here's one that's both. This one is images, but then this issue is PDF. Images are nice because you can preview them like that. PDF is obnoxious because it takes longer to load. But when it's a PDF, you can do that Control F search and then search within that issue for something. So that's really useful for like mission periodicals, like the Liahona Elders Journal is a mission periodical. And if you wanted to find when your ancestor was mentioned or something, you could just go issue by issue, do a Control F search and see if they're in there. The question was about using Boolean search tools. Do you mean generally or specifically with the library? Because I kind of tend to avoid them as much as possible just because they sometimes don't help. And if I did want to do something specific, then I would probably go to this advanced search, which kind of gives you that same Boolean feel, right? So you can say that, that, you know, you can do a search and you can say that I want the call number, or, you know, I want the author to be church news. And maybe that would help narrow it down, right? But not by much, because everything has authors as church news. So that doesn't really help. But yeah, you can do that in here because this is Boolean. And this is just an easier interface than trying to remember, like, is it capital and is it capital or, that kind of thing. So that's probably what I would do. And then the advanced search, and then I often just use these filters over the side here to narrow your results. I find that more useful as well. Okay, so if you have any other questions, feel free to bug them over the Church History Library. They can help you find even specific things sometimes. So I'd recommend doing that. And thank you all for your time. Thank you for your attendance. I really appreciate it.